All right, that's the end of the chapter. We're going to wrap it up here with just a few last things here. So in Europe, some borrowers receive interest payments on their loans. Euribor is an acronym for European Interbank Offered Rate, which is an interest rate on European interbank loans. Typically, banks in European countries such as Portugal charge the Euribor plus an intermediation fee for mortgage loans. And interestingly, recently in the past few years, Euribor became sufficiently negative that interest on mortgage also turned negative. That's an interesting scenario. So what does that mean when we have negative interest rates? It means that if you borrow money, you get paid to borrow it instead of paying to borrow it. And if you lend money, you have to pay to lend money rather than getting paid to lend money. Sort of uncharted territory here. Historically, we haven't really seen negative interest rates, but they're starting to pop up all over the world, and nobody's really sure what's going to happen as a result of this. So it's going to be an interesting several years or decades even to see what happens as a result of these negative interest rates. All right, why U.S. taxpayers are last resort funders of much of the financial industry. So the U.S. government guarantees taxpayer support in two forms. We're talking about bailouts here. If you've heard of during the Great Recession when we bailed out several industries, including the banking industry. So we as taxpayers guarantee support in two forms. There are explicit guarantees. These are legally binding promises that the U.S. Treasury will provide funds to back up a financial institution's liabilities if it fails to do so. There are also implicit commitments, which are non-legally binding guarantees, but virtually everyone anticipates the government would honor in the event of a crisis. Okay, so this is kind of what's happening right now with the airline industry. A lot of people are expecting the federal government to bail out the airline industry, so that would be an implicit commitment, sort of expected, but not legally binding. But then there are some explicit guarantees that are legally binding. The passage of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act has led to expansion of both of these types of guarantees. And of course, since it's the government providing this support, where does the government get its money? It gets it from you and me as taxpayers, right? So it's called corporate socialism. In pure capitalism, if an industry is failing, we let it die. So if you thought that America thrived on capitalism, think again. Plenty of socialism going on. All right, so that's the chapter on money, banking, and central banking. We talked about the functions of money, key properties, and the official definitions of the money supply. Right, M1 and M2, the transactions and liquidity approaches. We talked about financial intermediaries and why they exist. We talked about the basic structure and functions of the Federal Reserve System. We talked about, right, these are the different functions. We also talked about the money multiplier and fractional reserve banking. And how all that works. And then we talked about Federal Deposit Insurance, FDIC, and these issues of moral hazard and adverse selection. All right, I hope you enjoyed that chapter. So you guys have an exam coming up. It's due this Friday, May 8th by 11:59 p.m. This chapter is not on that exam. The exam covers the previous 3 chapters. So go into Moodle and look at what I'm talking about. Okay, you've got a practice exam that you can take as many times as you want. So I recommend doing that at least once or twice before taking the actual exam. But it does cover the previous 3 chapters. So not this chapter, but the previous 3 chapters. This chapter and the next chapter, which is the last chapter of the term, will be on the final, as well as everything we've learned before that. But that's what you've got coming up. So there's no video lecture for Thursday. Just focus on getting your exam done. And I will have the last video lecture of the term for you a week from today on Tuesday, May 12th. So, and then after that, we'll just spend the rest of the time getting prepared for the final, as well as completing the course assessment, which you know is a way to look at how well you understand sort of the major concepts of macro. Okay, so. Don't forget to do your participation credit in the discussion forum. In fact, let's see, what's a good question for you to sort of to prime you for the discussion? Here's a good one. Tell me what you think the effect of a reduction in the required reserve ratio would have on the money supply, right? So if currently the required reserve ratio is 10%, which means if you deposit $100, the bank has to keep $10 of that in cash in the vault. What would happen if they dropped it to if the Fed dropped it to 5%? What would be the effect on the money supply if that happened? All right. Good luck on your exam. I'll see you in the next and final lecture video.